By the time we reached the top of the climb, it was sunset. We decided that if we stayed where we were going to die. I had a tunnel vision, this big, huge black space all around me, starting at the periphery, and it was closing in rapidly. Hi, my name is Peter Panagore. In 1980, I died of hypothermia while ice climbing in Alberta, Canada. And this is what happened. Back when I was 14 years old, my sister, she was 4 years older than me, ran away from home, but from our point of view, she vanished. And it broke my family up pretty seriously. A lot of ramifications, long-term mourning, a lot of family silence in the family and outside of the family, a lot of secrecy. I couldn't take it anymore, so by the time I was a sophomore in college, I decided to go on national student exchange. So I went to Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana for a year. And come spring break, the next 1980, I didn't want to go home because of all the breakage in my family. So I went looking for a trip, and I ended up connecting with a guy in the outdoor club. And we went on a 10-day backcountry wilderness, snow caving, March, winter ski trip into the Canadian Rockies in British Columbia. And we ended the trip with this one-day ice climb in Alberta, which is north of Banff and south of Jasper. This climb was a famous climb, known all over the world, and it's right on the Icefields Parkway, and it's easy access, parking lot across the street. I should add that Tim was a certified lead climber. I had never ice climbed before, but I had done a lot of wilderness winter, summer, spring, fall experiencing through most of my life. But ice climbing was something new to me. Rock climbing, I was pretty good at it. Ice climbing's a different sport because it has different equipment. It's in the wintertime. I couldn't come up with all the equipment I needed. I borrowed and I rented, and I came up with one axe and a hammer. And you need 2 axes to climb. Set those axes in, click them in the bottom because there's a point at the bottom, let go of them and suspend yourself on the straps that are about a third of the way up the handle so you can rest. But I only had one of those, and I had a hammer about this long with the strap on the bottom. I talked Tim into it that I could do this climb with a hammer and an axe, 500, 600 feet up. And I did. But the problem with the hammer is when you set it in the ice, there's no way to let go and relax and rest. I had to grip it the whole time. And my swing was shorter with the hammer, only the head coming up to here instead of 18 inches above my hand on the big swing. So that slowed the climb down significantly. I got exhausted early. By the time we reached the top of the climb, it was sunset. And all the other teams that had been climbing on the same ice that day, to the left and to the right of us, they finished and they were leaving at sunset, and we had just reached the top. We knew we were in trouble hours before the sun went down because the cold was coming, and we knew that we were going to be on the cliff in the dark. But you can't just turn around and go down on the climb. You have to continue the climb up, and you must come down the rappels. It's not like a rule or a law. It's just the way the sport works. If you don't do it that way, you can get injured or die. By the time we reached the top of the climb, the sun set, temperature dropped about 30 degrees, and violent shivering began in both of us. Every single muscle in all of our bodies began to twitch independently of each other and making the whole body like clattering jaw, and everything's shaking and moving. And we knew that we were in serious trouble. We discussed our situation. We decided that if we stayed where we were going to die. No question. We were out of food, we were out of water, and we were wet because you sweat and ice falls down your back. None of the other teams had planned on spending the night. Nobody brought up any sleeping bags or extra coats or extra food. Everybody planned for the day, and then you descend, and that's what we did too. But we didn't anticipate the problem of my slow climb. Temperature dropped 30 degrees, violent shivers began. Tim hauled up the rope. The rope became a big tangled knot. I had to take off my gloves to work the rope, and so I began to get frostbite on my hands, frostbite on my face, frostbite on my feet. We decided that if we're going to stay where we were, we're going to die. So we decided to try to get off the mountain, at least fight our way down. The night was terrible. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. We began to make mistakes because hypothermia steals your capacity, a person's capacity for reasoning, making vital, important choices. And we made a few of those mistakes. One time, the first rappel, there was this tree, and we wrapped the nylon tubing around it. We were supposed to wrap nylon tubing around it and put the rope through it so it would dangle down, but we decided that we didn't want to put the nylon tubing around it because that cost money, and we didn't want to lose the money because you're going to have to leave the nylon tubing up there. So instead we threw the rope around the tree independently, and it froze to the tree by the time we got down to the bottom of the next rappel, which had an overhang, which meant that there was some free space here, so climbing back up was almost impossible. So we were stuck on our bottom of our first rappel with the rope frozen above us in 10 million stars in the sky. No moon at this point. Moon was starting to come out. We could see in this black and white sort of way. And we couldn't go back up. And yanking on the rope, both our weights would not come free, no matter what we did. So Tim decided at some point that our lives were really in peril, and he would reascend the rope. So he began to ascend up the rope with a particular kind of knot, a hitch, with loops. The hitch is tied around the double rope, and the loops were under his feet, and he began to shimmy his way back up. At some point, the rope came loose, and he fell, and I rolled out of the way, and he landed in the knee-deep snow. And he was unhurt, and we continued on our way. But all this took hours and hours and hours. And we were losing our coordination as we went. Every step of the way drained our energy. And the only thing keeping us warm was the energy that we had inside us and the movement going forward. But every step we took drained our energy and made death that much closer. So we were pushed up not only against time, but against dying. We made our next traverse in the dark, off the ice on the rock with our crampons clicking on the rock as we went. I remember listening, and we were driving ourselves forward with our willpower. One of the things I learned about Tim the week before when we were doing this 8-day snow caving trip was that I could trust him not to lose his head. We had some harrowing experiences when we were snow caving, and Tim never lost his head. I never lost my head. In the wilderness, if you lose your head, if you panic, that's a death sentence. We kept our calm, and we kept our drive, and we kept our talking to a minimum because our faces were freezing and our eyeballs were freezing and our brains were freezing, but also because every time we spoke, we drained energy. Every movement we made was one more tick down on the fuel gauge of life. And we were driving ourselves forward with mental capacity that I didn't even know that I had. I didn't know that I had that kind of fortitude. And then there was this point at which my fortitude went into a deeper place inside my brain, a place I did not know existed. Early mammal, or maybe even early reptile, some sort of place way deep inside my brain where survival became the only thing that mattered. It removed my willpower from it. I wasn't driving myself forward anymore. It was driving me. And as I moved through the rest of the night, I just sat inside this place way deep in my brain that was very little thinking, very little cognitive function, very little language, very little emotion, just survive. We get to the last rappel, came down this other rappel, get to the last rappel, and we're standing on a tabletop of granite. And in front of us is the mountain, and behind us is a 150 foot cliff straight down. In the mountain were 2 iron pins with iron rings, and these pins were epoxied in, and they had carabiners on them, and harnesses, the same nylon tubing with a carabiner on the end. It clipped into my harness. For the first time in the night, we were not going to fall. It was terrifying. I'd never been so scared in my life. I kept my fear under control, but I was terrified. My feet were on fire. My hands were on fire. My feet had gone to the place where they weren't really even on fire anymore. They were just numb, no feeling. And I knew enough about hypothermia because I'd been on the ski patrol since I was in high school, and I was working at a mountain in Bozeman as a volunteer. And I knew what was in store with frostbite and hypothermia. I was scared of dying. So we're at this last rappel, and Tim was to my left, and I had the rope. I'm the one who came down last, and we had come down this rocky crag around a corner, and at the top of this was an iron pin and a ring through which we put the rope. And we had descended down this craggy, rocky space and turned this corner and standing on this ledge where we were clipped in. And I took one end of the rope and I tied it to my harness. Took off my mittens to do this. It took me quite a while because I had to super concentrate on physical movement because every muscle in my body was freezing, made every movement difficult. I don't know if you've ever swum in a cold ocean, and a very cold ocean, and if you go into the cold part of the ocean, pretty soon it gets difficult just to lift your arm out of the water. The cold steals strength and mobility. So I tied this knot, and I took the other end of the rope and I tossed it out around the corner of this cliff, and I yanked, and on the first pull the rope jammed up above somewhere, I don't know, and I couldn't see it because it was around a corner and it was dark anyway in this crag. I flipped the line to try to lift the line out of whatever notch it was in. But the flip of the line got caught on the corner of the mountain and it stopped right there. I could see that. And so I pulled again and I kept pulling and it never got looser. It only got tighter. And we couldn't reascend. No rope for safety, super advanced hypothermia, frostbite, can't even feel anything. And a cliff, 100, 150 foot drop down. And we were wearing the wrong equipment. You can't go up rock with crampons on. Climb rock with rock shoes, but not with crampons. So I kept pulling on the rope, and we were both silent by this point. We'd been silent for a long time. Tim was in his own space. I was in my own space. I kept pulling on the rope. And I had this realization that I was going to die here, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't go up, and I couldn't go down. And when I had that death knowledge, my impending death, and I had no power to control anything anymore, I just accepted it. It was like a wave of peace came through me. It's okay. I didn't stop pulling on the rope, but it was okay. And I got hot. And so I unzipped my coat, which is a crazy thing to do, but it's what happens when your reasoning capacity leaves you. I felt all of my heat had rushed to my core. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't need my feet. I don't need my hands. I just need my heart and my brain and my lungs to survive. I can live with those things. And Tim yelled at me. First thing he said to me in hours, zip up your coat. I'm like, let's zip up my coat. I don't care. I'm hot. And I knew better. I knew that that's what hypothermic people do. But I didn't care. And then my dying accelerated, and I felt myself at peace and okay with the whole situation. And I began to think about my parents. I looked up at the stars. I looked off at the mountains. We were mountain range right across the street. We could hear the Saskatchewan River running underneath the ice, underneath the snow. And it was a beautiful place to die. And I thought how, oh my God, this is going to be freaking international news. college students die, and it'll be in the Boston papers, and my mom and my dad are going to be broken completely by this because my sister had broken them, especially my mom. And this was just going to destroy them. They were barely hanging on anyway, emotionally. Nothing I could do about it. So I kept pulling on the rope. I'd fall asleep and I'd crash the ledge. And I'd smack my helmeted head and I'd wake back up and I'd stand back up again. I'd pull the rope and I did this, I don't know, a bunch of times. I didn't count. And I stood up this last time, and as I stood up this last time, I had a tunnel vision. This big, huge black space all around me, starting at the periphery, and it was closing in rapidly. And as I looked around, it followed my vision. It was the strangest thing. And I looked at Tim, and I looked at the mountain, I looked at the stars, everything was shh. And as it began to come to close, I thought to myself, I must be falling asleep again. This must be sleep. But I hadn't ever experienced such a thing in sleep. And as it went to black, I didn't fall asleep. I was awake. And I was confused. I thought, why am I not asleep? Am I asleep? I'm thinking, I can't be asleep. Where's the mountain? Where's all my pain? Why? What is going on? Where the mountain had been expanded into this blackness. Not the blackness of night, but a deeper, darker blackness that had depth to it. It had depth to it because in a moment, way far in the distance, a pinprick of light, like a single star in the night, appeared way, way, way far away. And as I looked at it, not understanding what was going on with me, it rushed toward me. This light rushed toward me faster than the speed of light and filled my vision with light as it came toward me. And it said to me, telepathically, without language, it spoke to me and said, I'm taking you. And I said, I don't know what's going on in my head. And I could say it's my head, but I didn't have a brain at this point. I think to myself, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going anywhere. And it rushed toward me and it reached and it took me. And I lost all agency. I lost all power of anything. And it enveloped me inside itself, and it fed me its intelligence. It is super intelligence. It showed me its comfort. It showed me its power. And I was inside of this entity, rushing back up the way it came. And it was much bigger than me. And I had a shape to me, but I had a more like a body of light, not a body of matter. And I was rushing back up the way that I came, and I was outside of myself also. I was in two places at once. I was outside of myself, seeing my light body inside of this angelic being, this orb of light carrying me up to this edge where this darkness ended, and I couldn't see beyond that space. But I was traveling in parallel with myself, and when I looked over through this transparent entity I was inside of, I couldn't see myself looking at me, but I could see from this non-locus place, I could see me inside the entity. So I was in two places at once with 2 points of view. And in one of them, I had a physical form, and in one of them, I didn't. This physical form was the shape of a human body, but it was made of light. And pop, we reached the edge of this space, this distance between worlds, and it opens or unfolds, and I'm in another darkness, and this darkness is deeper and darker and wider, and I am myself again. I have not a physical body at all, no photons, no light body. I am an orb of consciousness, and I know myself. I know that this is who I am, and this is who I've always been. I'd never been a human being. Not really. I'd always been this other, larger consciousness. And my thinking was my feeling, was my seeing, was my hearing. There was no separation of my senses or myself or my thinking. I was one entity, a oneness. And I could see in every direction at once in this deep darkness. And I could see because it was illuminated, it had its own luminosity in the darkness. and I could see in every direction to the edge of infinity. There was a point at which was much further than my human eyes could ever see, a way that was the darkness itself, and this darkness was impenetrable to my sight, but I was content. I was enveloped with joy and rest and the end of my suffering and timelessness. There was no time, and I knew myself, and I was awake again. And as I was there, a waterfall of light appeared, like the darkness ripped open, or the infinite darkness reached out to me, or lots of different metaphors. Everything I'm saying is in a metaphor because I had no brain. I had no nose. I didn't have eyeballs. I didn't have thoughts in words. I didn't have thoughts in images. I was entirely non-matter. And so everything I say about it is a metaphor, the best I can. This light, waterfall of light appeared, open space, began coming toward me, and it was the most beautiful I had ever seen.